The message came through the Deep Space Communication Array at exactly 1427 Galactic Standard Time. Ambassador Kiwan was reviewing trade agreements when his assistant Nari burst into his office, her face pale with excitement. "Sir, you need to see this immediately," she said, holding out a datapad with shaking hands. Kiwan took the device and read the transmission header. His eyes widened. "A new species? After 12 years of silence from the Outer Rim?" The message was simple and direct. It came from a species calling themselves humans, from a system they named Sol. They requested formal contact with the Galactic Council and expressed interest in peaceful relations. What made Kiwan's heart race was not just the discovery of new intelligent life, but the fact that they had managed to send a message across such vast distances. "Have we confirmed the source location?" Kiwan asked. "Yes, sir." The signal originated from the third spiral arm, approximately 47,000 light-years from here. Our analysis shows they used a quantum relay system, though their technology appears somewhat primitive compared to our standards. Kiwan nodded slowly. In his 300 years as an ambassador, he had overseen first contact with 17 different species. Each time followed a predictable pattern. New civilizations always started with the same basic needs: trade, technology exchange, and protection from the various dangers that lurked in the darker corners of the galaxy. "Schedule an emergency council session," he ordered, "and prepare the Harmony's Edge for a diplomatic mission." 3 days later, Captain Bora stood on the bridge of the Council's most advanced diplomatic vessel. The ship was a marvel of engineering, equipped with the finest translation systems, cultural analysis computers, and defensive systems the galaxy could offer. Around her, the crew of 25 beings from 12 different species worked with practiced efficiency. "Captain, we're receiving another transmission from the humans," reported Communications Officer Hansel, a tall, blue-skinned being from the Centauri sector. "Put it through the main screen," Bora commanded. The image that appeared showed a bipedal creature with pale skin and dark hair. It wore simple clothing and spoke in a measured tone. The translation system worked perfectly, converting the alien language into something all crew members could understand. "Greetings to the Galactic Council. I am Ambassador Do-Yun, speaking on behalf of the human race. We are honored by your willingness to establish contact. We await your arrival at the coordinates we have provided." Bora studied the being carefully. Humans appeared remarkably similar to several species already in the Council, particularly the Altarians and the Vegan colonists. This was often a good sign. Species that looked similar usually shared similar values and ways of thinking. "They seem peaceful enough," observed Science Officer Soman. "Their initial communications show no signs of aggression or territorial claims." "That's what we hope to find," Bora replied. "But we've learned to be cautious. Remember the Zorkan incident." The crew fell silent. Everyone remembered the Zorkan incident. What had started as a peaceful first contact had turned into a nightmare when the insectoid species revealed their true nature as a hive mind bent on assimilation. It had taken the combined fleets of 6 council worlds to contain them. Admiral Taman joined them on the bridge as they prepared for the jump to hyperspace. He was one of the oldest beings in the council fleet, with over 4 centuries of experience in dealing with new species. "What's your assessment, Admiral?" Bora asked. Taman stroked his silver beard thoughtfully. "From what I've seen in their transmissions, they appear to follow the standard development pattern. They've achieved faster-than-light communication, but are probably still working on practical FTL travel. Their ship designs, from what little we've observed, suggest they're maybe 2 or 3 centuries behind our current technology level. That would put them at about the same level as the Rigelians when we first met them," noted Engineer Minseo. "Exactly, which means they're probably looking for the same things all new species want: protection, trade opportunities, and access to more advanced technology. Nothing we haven't handled dozens of times before." Navigator Yunji announced that they were ready for the jump. Course laid in for the Sol system, estimated travel time 6 days. As the ship entered hyperspace, Kiwan gathered his diplomatic team in the main conference room. The team included cultural specialists Jiho and Minho, along with trade negotiator Yejin and military advisor Jiyung. "Let's review what we know about humans," Kiwan began, activating the holographic display. "They're a carbon-based life form from a planet they call Earth. They've been spacefaring for approximately 200 of their years, which translates to about 150 galactic standard years." "That's actually quite impressive," noted Jiho. "Most species take twice that long to develop interstellar communication capabilities." "True, but they're still well within normal parameters," Yejin added. "Their economic systems appear to be based on resource exchange and technological development. Standard capitalism with some social modifications." Military advisor Ji-young pulled up tactical displays. "Their defensive capabilities seem minimal. We've detected some orbital platforms around their homeworld and a few patrol vessels, but nothing that would pose any threat to council ships. Their weapons technology appears to be primarily kinetic-based with some early energy systems. In other words, exactly what we'd expect from a species at their development level," Kaiwan concluded. "This should be a straightforward integration process." The journey through hyperspace passed without incident. The crew used the time to study human culture through their public broadcasts and data transmissions. What they found was encouraging. Humans appeared to value individual freedom while maintaining strong social bonds. They had overcome most of their internal conflicts and seemed genuinely interested in peaceful exploration and discovery. "They remind me a lot of the Andromedans when we first met them," observed Nari during one of their briefing sessions. "Curious, cautious, but ultimately friendly." "Let's hope they stay that way," Bora remarked from the captain's chair. "The galaxy has enough problems without adding another aggressive species to the mix." On the 5th day of their journey, they received another transmission from the humans. This time, Ambassador Do-hyun was joined by several other humans, including what appeared to be military officers and scientists. "We are greatly looking forward to meeting you," Do-hyun said. "As a gesture of openness and trust, we would like to invite you to tour our system and observe our defensive capabilities. We believe transparency is the foundation of any lasting friendship." The council team exchanged glances. This was unexpected. Most new species were secretive about their military capabilities, often trying to appear stronger than they actually were. The humans seemed to be doing the opposite. "It could be a trap," Ji-young warned quietly. "Or it could be exactly what it appears to be," Kiwan countered. "A peaceful species trying to prove they're not a threat." Admiral Taman nodded approvingly. "I like their approach. Open communication about military capabilities reduces the chance of misunderstandings later. And frankly, from what we've seen, they're not exactly in a position to threaten anyone." As they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, the council delegation prepared for what they expected to be another routine first contact. They had their standard protocols, their tried and tested diplomatic procedures, and centuries of experience dealing with new species. What they found, waiting for them, would change everything they thought they knew about humanity and about power itself. The Sol system looked exactly like what the Council expected from a young spacefaring civilization. As the Harmony's Edge approached the outer planets, Science Officer Soman ran continuous scans of the area. Her readings showed the typical signs of early space development, mining operations on asteroids, research stations orbiting the gas giants, and a modest defensive grid around the inner planets. "It's all very standard," Soman reported to Captain Bora. "They have about 30 orbital platforms around their homeworld, maybe 50 patrol ships scattered throughout the system. Nothing unusual for a species at their technological level." Ambassador Kiwan studied the tactical display with satisfaction. Everything matched their expectations perfectly. The humans had achieved basic space travel and were working on expanding their presence in their home system. It was textbook civilization development. "Any signs of the human delegation?" Bora asked. Communications Officer Hansel adjusted his instruments. "Yes, Captain. I'm reading a single ship approaching from the direction of the third planet. It appears to be a diplomatic transport vessel." On the main screen, the human ship grew larger as it approached. It was a simple design, clearly built for function rather than appearance. The hull was a basic gray metal with minimal external features. Compared to the elegant curves and artistic designs of council ships, it looked almost primitive. "Not much to look at, is it?" observed Engineer Minseo. "Form follows function," Admiral Taman replied. "Young civilizations haven't had time to develop aesthetic sensibilities in their ship design. They're focused on making things work, not making them beautiful." The human ship docked with the Harmony's Edge without any problems. The docking process itself told the council team a lot about human technology. Their systems were compatible with standard galactic protocols, but the machinery was clearly several generations behind current council standards. Ambassador Do Hyun boarded with a small delegation. He was exactly as he had appeared in the transmissions, a middle-aged human with graying hair and intelligent eyes. His clothing was simple but well-made, and his manner was both respectful and confident. "Welcome to our system," Do Hyun said as he shook hands with Ambassador Kiwon. "We are honored to meet representatives of the Galactic Council." The human delegation included Captain Hyun, who commanded their escort vessel, and Dr. Bomi, who served as their chief scientist. They all seemed genuinely excited about the meeting, asking questions about council technology and culture with the curiosity of children. "Your ship is magnificent," Captain Hyun said as they toured the Harmony's Edge. "The energy efficiency of your drive systems must be incredible." "Thank you," Bora replied. "This is actually one of our older diplomatic vessels. We've had much more advanced ships for several decades now." Captain Hyun nodded appreciatively. "We have so much to learn from you. Our own technology is still quite basic compared to what you've achieved." The modesty was refreshing. Most new species either tried to boast about their capabilities or were so overwhelmed by council technology that they became completely subservient. The humans struck a perfect balance between respect and confidence. During the formal diplomatic sessions, the humans presented their requests clearly and reasonably. They wanted to establish trade relationships, particularly for advanced materials and energy systems. They offered raw materials from their asteroid mining operations and some interesting developments in quantum computing. "Your proposals are very reasonable," Kiwon assured them. "The Council always welcomes new trading partners, especially ones as peaceful as yourselves." Dr. Bomi leaned forward eagerly. "We're particularly interested in your medical technology. Some of the healing techniques we've observed in your database could help us solve several health problems that still affect our population." Trade negotiator. Yejin made notes on his datapad. "I'm sure we can arrange some technology transfers. Your quantum computing research might be valuable to some of our member worlds." Everything was proceeding exactly as expected. The humans were polite, reasonable, and clearly in need of the protection and technological advancement that council membership could provide. It was shaping up to be one of the smoothest first contacts in recent memory. On the second day of meetings, Ambassador Do Hyun made an unexpected offer. "As a gesture of good faith and transparency," he said, "we would like to invite you to tour our defensive installations. We believe that open communication about military capabilities helps prevent misunderstandings." The council delegation exchanged glances. This was unusual but not unprecedented. Some species chose to display their defensive systems as a way of demonstrating that they posed no threat to their neighbors. "That's very thoughtful of you," Kiwon replied. "We accept your invitation." Military advisor Ji-young privately wondered what the humans thought they had to show. Their scans indicated a fairly typical defensive setup for a young civilization. A few dozen orbital platforms, some patrol ships, maybe a space dock or two. It would be interesting from an anthropological perspective, but hardly impressive from a military standpoint. Captain Hyun seemed excited as he outlined the tour route. We thought we'd start with some of our outer system facilities and work our way toward the inner planets. That way you can see how we've organized our defensive perimeter. Sounds excellent, Admiral Taman replied. We're always interested in how different species approach system defense. The tour began at one of the asteroid mining stations in the outer system. It was a modest facility, clearly designed for resource extraction rather than defense. The humans explained their mining techniques with enthusiasm, pointing out innovations they had developed to improve efficiency. This is actually quite clever, Engineer Minseo admitted as they observed the mining operations. They found ways to extract materials that we usually consider too difficult to bother with. Necessity breeds innovation, Dr. Bomi explained. We haven't had access to the more abundant resources that established galactic civilizations can draw upon, so we've had to be creative. The next stop was a research station orbiting one of the gas giants. Here, the humans were studying atmospheric dynamics and working on improving their weather prediction systems. Again, it was all very standard for a developing civilization. Your research methodology is quite sound, Science Officer Soman observed. You're approaching these problems in ways that are very similar to how several council species handled them during their development. That's encouraging to hear, Dr. Bomi replied. We sometimes worry that we're reinventing solutions that others have already found. As they moved deeper into the system, the council delegation continued to be impressed by human ingenuity and determination, but nothing they saw challenged their basic assessment. The humans were a peaceful, developing species who would benefit greatly from council membership and protection. Their defensive installations were exactly what the scans had indicated: modest orbital platforms with basic weapons systems, patrol ships that looked functional but unimpressive, and a few larger vessels that appeared to be converted cargo ships. Your defensive grid shows good strategic thinking, Ji-young complimented them. You've positioned your platforms to provide overlapping coverage of the most important areas. Captain Hyun smiled. Thank you. We've tried to learn from the experiences of other species, though we know our capabilities are still quite limited. Everything about the humans continued to reinforce the Council's initial assessment. They were humble, peaceful, and eager to learn. Their technology was developing nicely but was still generations behind Council standards. Their military capabilities were adequate for defending against pirates or raiders, but would be useless against any serious threat. It was exactly the kind of species the Council enjoyed welcoming into their alliance. The humans would provide new perspectives and resources, while the Council would offer protection and technological advancement. Everyone would benefit. As the tour continued toward the inner system, Ambassador Kiwan felt confident that this first contact would be remembered as one of the most successful in Council history. The humans were proving to be ideal candidates for membership. He had no idea that everything he thought he knew about humanity was about to change forever. The tour of the human defensive installations continued for 3 more days. Each stop reinforced what the Council delegation already believed about humanity's place in the galactic hierarchy. The orbital platforms were well-designed but basic. The patrol ships were functional but clearly built with limited resources. Everything spoke of a young civilization doing its best with what it had. Your people have shown remarkable ingenuity, Admiral Taman told Captain Hyun as they observed a communications relay station near Mars. Working within such technological limitations while still maintaining system-wide coverage is impressive. Captain Hyun nodded appreciatively. We've learned that sometimes the best solutions come from having to work with less. When you can't rely on overwhelming technological advantage, you have to be creative. Something about the way he said it made military advisor Ji-young look up from her datapad. There was a tone in the human's voice that she couldn't quite identify. Not boastfulness, exactly, but something that suggested deeper meaning behind the words. "Captain Hyun," she said carefully, "when you mention technological limitations, are you referring to your current defensive system specifically, or your military capabilities in general?" Captain Hyun exchanged a quick glance with Ambassador Do-hyun before answering. "Well, these outer system installations are designed primarily for monitoring and early warning. Our more substantial defensive assets are positioned closer to Earth and the inner planets." "Of course," Ji-young replied. "That's standard strategic doctrine. Keep your main defenses protecting your most valuable assets." But something nagged at her about the exchange. The humans had been completely open about everything else they had shown the delegation. Why did she suddenly sense they were choosing their words more carefully? Navigator Yunji had been quietly analyzing the tactical data they had collected during the tour. She approached Ambassador Kaiwan during a break in the proceedings. "Sir, I've been reviewing our scans of the human defensive network," she said quietly. "There are some inconsistencies that I can't explain." "What kind of inconsistencies?" "Well, the energy readings from some of their installations don't match what we're actually seeing. According to our sensors, several of the platforms we've visited should have much more powerful systems than what they've demonstrated." Kiwon frowned. "Are you suggesting they're hiding something?" "Not hiding exactly, but maybe not showing us everything. The power signatures suggest they have capabilities beyond what we've observed." Ambassador Kiwon considered this information carefully. It wasn't unusual for new species to be cautious about revealing their full military capabilities during first contact. Most civilizations preferred to appear strong enough to be respected, but not so strong as to be threatening. "Keep monitoring," he instructed, "but don't make an issue of it unless something seems genuinely suspicious." On the fourth day of the tour, Captain Hyun made an announcement that surprised everyone. "Tomorrow, we'd like to show you one of our more significant defensive installations," he said during the morning briefing. "It's located in the outer orbit of Saturn, and it represents some of our more advanced defensive thinking." Science Officer Somin perked up with interest. "Advanced? In what way?" "Well, it's larger than most of our installations, and it incorporates some technologies that we've been developing specifically for deep space defense scenarios." "How much larger?" Admiral Taman asked. Dr. Bomi consulted her data pad. "The installation is built into one of Saturn's moons. We call it Titan Base. It's designed to serve as both a research facility and a defensive strongpoint." The council delegation nodded approvingly. Building defensive installations into natural bodies was a common practice among spacefaring civilizations. It provided natural protection and abundant raw materials for construction. "That sounds very interesting," Ambassador Kiwon said. "We'd be honored to see it." Captain Hyun smiled. "Excellent. I think you'll find it educational." Again, Ji-young noticed something in the human's tone that she couldn't quite identify. There was an undercurrent of anticipation that seemed out of proportion to showing off a moon-based installation. That evening, as the council delegation prepared for the next day's tour, Engineer Minseo ran detailed scans of the Saturn system. What he found puzzled him. "Captain Bora," he said, approaching her in the ship's observation lounge. "I've been analyzing the Saturn system in preparation for tomorrow's visit. There's something strange about the moon they want to show us." "Strange how?" "The mass readings don't make sense. According to our scans, Titan should be a fairly typical moon, mostly rock and ice with some hydrocarbons. But the gravitational readings suggest it's much denser than it should be." Bora studied the data on his display. "Could there be mineral deposits we're not detecting?" "Possibly. But the distribution pattern is all wrong. Natural mineral deposits would create irregular gravitational variations. This looks almost artificial." "Artificial how?" "Like someone has been doing major structural modifications to the moon's interior." but that would require engineering capabilities far beyond what we've seen from the humans so far. Bora considered this information. Maybe they've been more ambitious with their construction projects than we realized. Some species do try to exceed their technological capabilities when they're building defensive installations. Maybe, Minseo agreed, but he sounded doubtful. The journey to Saturn took most of the next day. As they approached the gas giant, the council delegation could see several moons orbiting in the distance. Titan was clearly visible, appearing as a large, brownish sphere with what looked like artificial structures on its surface. "There it is," Captain Hyun announced proudly. "Titan Base, one of our more ambitious projects." Through the observation windows, the council team could see what appeared to be a substantial installation built into the moon's surface. There were docking facilities, communication arrays, and what looked like manufacturing complexes. It was certainly impressive for a young civilization, though still well within expected parameters. "How long did it take to build?" asked Ambassador Kiwan. "Oh, we've been working on it for about 15 years, Dr. Bomi replied. "It started as a research station, but we kept expanding it as our needs grew." "The construction must have been quite challenging," observed Engineer Minseo. "Building inside a moon requires significant excavation and structural support." "Yes, it did present some interesting engineering problems," Captain Hyun agreed. "But we found solutions." As they drew closer to Titan, Science Officer Somin noticed something that made her double-check her instruments. "Captain Bora, I'm reading some very unusual energy signatures from the moon." "What kind of energy signatures?" "Power generation systems, but the output levels are, well, they're much higher than anything we've seen from human technology so far." Admiral Taman joined them at the sensor station. "How much higher?" Somin recalibrated her instruments to make sure she was reading correctly. "At least 10 times higher than their largest installation we've visited so far. Maybe more." The council delegation exchanged glances. This was starting to venture into unexpected territory. The humans had been consistently modest about their capabilities, but this installation suggested they might have access to much more advanced technology than they had revealed. "Perhaps they've made some recent breakthroughs," suggested Navigator Yunji. "Young civilizations sometimes achieve sudden advances in specific areas." "Possible," Admiral Taman replied, but his expression suggested he was beginning to have doubts about their assessment of human capabilities. As their ship approached the docking facilities on Titan's surface, Captain Hyun turned to address the council delegation with a smile that seemed somehow different from his previous expressions. There was still warmth and friendliness, but now there was also something else, something that looked almost like anticipation. "Before we dock," he said, "I should probably mention that Titan Base is somewhat larger than our previous installations. You might find some of our defensive systems here to be surprising." "Surprising how?" Military Advisor Ji-young asked. Captain Hyun's smile widened slightly. "Well, let's just say that this facility represents a somewhat different approach to the concept of space-based defense." As the ship settled into the docking bay, none of the council delegation could have imagined that they were about to discover the most carefully guarded secret in human space. They thought they were visiting an impressive but ultimately modest defensive installation built by a young and peaceful civilization. They had no idea they were about to come face to face with something that would fundamentally change their understanding of humanity's place in the galaxy. The docking bay inside Titan Base was larger than anything the council delegation had expected. As they disembarked from their shuttle, Ambassador Kiwan noticed that the facility seemed to stretch much further into the moon's interior than should have been possible. "This is quite an extensive operation," he observed to Captain Hyun. "Yes, we've found that working inside natural bodies allows for much more expansion than traditional space stations," Captain Hyun replied. "Once you get started with the excavation, it's surprising how much space you can create." The tour began in what appeared to be a standard command center. Banks of monitors displayed information about the local space environment, communication channels buzzed with routine traffic, and technicians worked at various stations with the quiet efficiency of a well-run operation. This is our primary coordination. Facility for the outer system, explained Lieutenant Wubin, a young human officer who had joined them for the tour. From here, we can monitor everything from Jupiter's orbit out to the edge of the system. Science Officer Soman studied the displays with professional interest. Your sensor range is quite impressive. These readings suggest you can track objects well beyond what we observed at your other installations. We've made some improvements to our detection systems, Dr. Bomi said modestly. When you're operating this far from the inner planets, you need better early warning capabilities. As they moved deeper into the facility, Engineer Minseo began to notice things that didn't quite fit with his understanding of human technological capabilities. The construction was more sophisticated than he expected, with structural supports that suggested the excavation went much deeper than anyone had mentioned. How far into the moon does this facility extend? He asked Lieutenant Wubin. Oh, quite a way, the young officer replied cheerfully. We found it efficient to use as much of the available space as possible. The corridor they were walking through was clearly artificial, carved from the moon's interior with precision that spoke of advanced construction techniques. The walls were lined with materials that Minseo didn't recognize, and the environmental systems seemed more sophisticated than what they had observed elsewhere in human space. Your construction techniques are quite advanced, he complimented their hosts. Thank you, Captain Hyun replied. We've learned that when you're building something this important, it's worth taking the time to do it right. Admiral Taman noticed something that made him pause. That's an interesting phrase. This important. Important in what way? Captain Hyun exchanged another of those quick glances with Dr. Bomi before answering. Well, Titan Base serves as our primary defensive coordination point for the outer system. If something were to threaten our civilization, this is where we would coordinate our response. That makes sense, Admiral Taman replied. But military advisor Ji-young was starting to feel increasingly uneasy. Something about the way the humans talked about their defensive capabilities suggested they were dealing with threats that seemed beyond what a young civilization should encounter. What kind of threats do you typically prepare for? She asked. Lieutenant Wubin looked confused by the question. The usual ones, I suppose. Hostile fleets, system killer weapons, dimensional incursions, that sort of thing. The council delegation stopped walking. Communications Officer Hansel spoke first. Did you say dimensional incursions? Oh, yes, Lieutenant Wubin replied casually. We've had several encounters with entities from parallel dimensions. Nothing too serious, but you have. To be prepared for anything. Navigator Yunji felt her mouth go dry. Dimensional incursions were theoretical threats that even the most advanced council civilizations only worried about in abstract terms. The idea that humans not only knew about them, but had actually dealt with them, was disturbing. Perhaps we could see some of your defensive systems? Ambassador Kiwan suggested, trying to steer the conversation back to more concrete topics. Of course, Captain Hyun agreed, though I should warn you some of our equipment might seem a bit extensive for a facility this size. They took an elevator that descended much further than any of the council members had expected. The depth indicators showed they were traveling nearly to the moon's core, a distance that should have been impossible given Titan's original structure. This elevator shaft is remarkably deep, observed Engineer Minseo. Yes, we needed access to the lower levels for our main systems. Dr. Bomi explained. The power generation and primary defensive systems require a lot of space. When the elevator doors opened, the council delegation found themselves in a vast chamber that clearly could not fit inside the original moon. The space stretched away in all directions, filled with machinery and systems that hummed with barely contained energy. "This is impossible," Science Officer Soman whispered. "This chamber is larger than the moon itself." "Well, not larger exactly," Lieutenant Wubin said helpfully, "but we have done some spatial modification work. When you're dealing with the power requirements of our defensive systems, you need room to work." "Spatial modification?" Admiral Taman's voice was strained. "You're talking about space-time engineering. That's technology that even the most advanced council civilizations are only beginning to understand." Captain Hyun looked surprised. "Really? We thought it was fairly standard. We've been using spatial modification techniques for about 50 years now." The implications of what they were hearing began to sink in. If the humans had been casually using space-time engineering for half a century, then their technological capabilities were far beyond anything the Council had encountered. "Perhaps we could see your power generation systems?" Ambassador Kiwan asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Certainly," Dr. Bomi replied. She led them to an observation platform overlooking the chamber's center. Below them, a structure that defied easy description hummed with energy that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "This is our primary power core," she explained. "It's based on controlled stellar collapse technology. We're essentially running a miniature star in a contained gravitational field." Engineer Minseo gripped the observation rail to steady himself. You're containing a stellar mass object inside a moon?" "Oh, it's not full stellar mass," Lieutenant Wubin clarified. "Just enough to provide adequate power for our defensive systems. About 1/10 of solar mass, I think." The council delegation stood in stunned silence. What the humans were describing, casually, was technology that surpassed anything in the known galaxy. The energy requirements alone should have been impossible for any civilization to achieve. "Your defensive systems," military advisor Ji Young managed to say. "What exactly do they defend against?" Captain Hyun gestured toward another section of the massive chamber. "Well, the usual things. Planetary siege fleets, reality-warping weapons, time-traveling invasion forces. We learned early on that if you want to protect your civilization, you have to be prepared for threats that most people can't even imagine." "Time-traveling invasion forces?" Communications Officer Hansel repeated weakly. "Oh yes, we've dealt with several of those. Very tricky opponents. They tend to attack you before you realize they're enemies. But once you know what to look for, they're manageable." Ambassador Kiwan realized that everything they thought they knew about humanity was wrong. These weren't peaceful primitives seeking protection from the galaxy's dangers. These were beings who casually dealt with threats that existed only in the nightmares of advanced civilizations. "Captain Hyun," he said carefully, "when you invited us to tour your defensive installations, what exactly were you hoping to show us?" Captain Hyun's expression became more serious. "Ambassador Kiwan, we wanted you to understand that humanity's interest in joining the Galactic Council isn't because we need protection. We're interested because we believe the galaxy would be a safer place if we worked together." "Safer for whom?" whispered Navigator Yunji. "For everyone," Dr. Bomi replied simply. "There are things out there in the dark between galaxies that make system killer fleets look like minor nuisances. We've been fighting them for decades. We thought it was time to let our neighbors know they don't have to face those threats alone." As the full implications of what they were learning began to sink in, The council delegation realized they were no longer conducting a first contact with a primitive species seeking protection. They were standing inside a weapon of unimaginable power, built by beings who fought threats that the rest of the galaxy didn't even know existed, and this was just one of their smaller defensive installations. The silence in the observation chamber stretched for long moments as the council delegation tried to process what they had just learned. Science Officer Somin was the first to find her voice. "Captain Hyun," she said carefully, "when you say you've been fighting threats from between galaxies, are you speaking metaphorically?" "Oh no," Lieutenant Wubin replied cheerfully. "Quite literally. Just last year we had an incursion from the Void Hunters, nasty creatures that exist in the spaces between realities. They consumed 3 star systems in the Andromeda Galaxy before we managed to track them down." "You tracked them down in another galaxy?" Ambassador Kiwan's voice was barely above a whisper. "Well, yes. When something threatens inhabited worlds, you can't just ignore it because it's far away," Dr. Bomi explained, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "That's the whole point of having defensive capabilities that can reach beyond your home system." Admiral Taman was staring at the power core below them, his mind racing to comprehend the implications. How is this possible? The energy requirements for intergalactic travel alone should be beyond any single civilization. Captain Hyun gestured to the humming machinery around them. "That's why we built installations like this. When you're dealing with threats that can move between galaxies and dimensions, you need infrastructure that can support a proportional response." Engineer Minseo was studying the structural supports of the chamber with growing amazement. "This entire installation? It's not built into the moon, is it? The moon is built around the installation." "Very perceptive," Dr. Bomi said approvingly. "We found it was easier to construct the facility first and then build a moon-like shell around it. Provides excellent camouflage and protection while still, allowing us to operate at full capacity." "You built an artificial moon?" Navigator Yunji asked faintly. 7 of them, actually, Lieutenant Wubin said proudly. 1 for each major threat vector we've identified. This one handles extra-dimensional incursions and deep space anomalies. The others cover different specialties. The council delegation exchanged horrified glances. They had spent days touring what they thought was humanity's defensive network, never realizing they were looking at camouflaged installations that individually possessed more power than entire council fleets. "These 7 installations," Military Advisor Ji-Young asked slowly, "are they all similar to this one?" "Oh no," Captain Hyun replied. "Each one is designed for different types of threats. The one near Mercury specializes in temporal warfare. The Jupiter installation handles reality-warping entities. Mars-based deals with hive mind species and collective consciousness threats." "You have a base specifically for fighting hive mind species?" Communications Officer Hansel asked, thinking of the Zorkan incident that had terrified the council. 3 of them, actually," Dr. Bomi said. "Hive minds are more common than you might think. We've encountered 17 different varieties in the past century. Most of them were peaceful once we explained the situation to them, but a few required more direct intervention." Ambassador Kiwan felt as though the universe was shifting around him. "When you say direct intervention, well, sometimes you have to demonstrate that assimilation isn't always the optimal strategy," Lieutenant Wubin explained. "Most hive minds are actually quite reasonable once they understand that there are consequences for aggressive expansion." "You fought 17 different hive mind species in one?" Admiral Taman asked. "Fought is a strong word," Captain Hyun said thoughtfully. "We prefer to think of it as aggressive diplomacy. Though I suppose the ones that tried to assimilate our colony worlds might see it differently." Science Officer Soman was frantically trying to recalibrate her understanding of galactic power structures. These colony worlds you mentioned, how many systems do humans control? Control is also a strong word, Dr. Bomi replied. We have settlement rights in about 400 systems, and defensive agreements with another 800 or so. But we try not to be too heavy-handed about administration. Local species usually know how to manage their own affairs. 1,200 systems? Navigator Yunji's voice cracked slightly. Give or take a few dozen, Lieutenant Wubin said casually. The exact number changes depending on how you count research stations and monitoring posts. The Council controlled fewer than 300 systems, and that was considered a vast interstellar empire. The idea that humans casually administered an area 4 times larger was almost incomprehensible. Perhaps, Ambassador Kiwan said carefully, we could see more of your defensive systems? To better understand your capabilities? Of course, Captain Hyun agreed. Though we should probably start with the smaller weapons. The main artillery might be a bit overwhelming. He led them to another section of the vast chamber where what appeared to be a series of massive cannons were mounted on rotating platforms. Each weapon was easily the size of a Council starship. These are our standard defensive guns, Dr. Bomi explained. Each one can deliver approximately 50 times the destructive power of a Council dreadnought's main weapon. Engineer Minseo stared at the weapons in disbelief. How many of these guns does this installation have? On this level, about 200, Lieutenant Wubin replied. But we have 17 levels of gun decks, 3,400 weapons, military advisor Ji Young calculated automatically. Then immediately wished she hadn't. The math was terrifying. Plus the missile systems, energy projectors, and reality anchors, Captain Hyun added helpfully, though those are on different levels. Reality anchors? Admiral Taman asked, though he was beginning to dread the answer. For keeping enemy forces locked in this dimension, Dr. Bomi explained. Some entities try to escape into parallel realities when a battle turns against them. The reality anchors prevent that. Ambassador Kiwan was beginning to understand that humanity's invitation to tour their defensive installations hadn't been naive openness. It had been a carefully calculated demonstration of power that was so overwhelming it couldn't be mistaken for a threat. Captain Hyun, he said slowly. When humanity expressed interest in joining the Galactic Council, what exactly were you hoping to achieve? Captain Hyun's expression became more serious. Ambassador, the galaxy is not as safe as the Council believes it to be. There are threats out there that make the dangers you've encountered look like minor inconveniences. We've been handling these threats alone for over a century, but we think it's time to share the burden. You want us to help you fight. These threats? Science Officer Samin asked. Not exactly, Dr. Bomi replied. We want to help you prepare for them, because sooner or later, they're going to notice that this galaxy has developed intelligent life, and when that happens, everyone will need to be ready. What kind of threats are we talking about? Communications Officer Hansel asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Lieutenant Wubin consulted a data pad. Well, there are the Devourers from the Galactic Core. They consume entire star systems for fuel. The machine intelligence from the spiral arms that turns planets into computation centers. The entropy cult that tries to accelerate universal heat death. And those are just the ones we know about. Navigator Yunji sat down heavily on a nearby bench. The scope of what the humans were describing was beyond anything the Council had ever imagined. How long have you been fighting these entities? She asked weakly. About 150 years, Captain Hyun replied, ever since we developed faster-than-light travel and started attracting their attention. And you've been winning? Admiral Taman asked. So far, Dr. Bomey said modestly, though it's been a close thing a few times. That's why we built installations like this one. When you're facing threats that can destroy galaxies, you need to be prepared for anything. As the full scope of humanity's secret war became clear, the Council delegation realized that everything they thought they knew about their place in the universe was wrong. They weren't the dominant power in the galaxy. They were barely even aware of the real dangers that existed, and humanity had been protecting them from those dangers for over a century without them ever knowing it. Captain Bora had been quiet during most of the tour, but now she stepped forward with the bearing of someone who had commanded fleets in combat. "Captain Hyun," she said, her voice steady despite the shock of what they had learned. "I need to understand something. You speak of these installations as defensive systems, but what we're seeing here could destroy entire star systems. This isn't defense. This is a weapon of mass destruction." Captain Hyun nodded approvingly. "An excellent observation, Captain. You're absolutely right. This installation could destroy star systems. In fact, it has destroyed star systems. 17 of them, to be precise." The Council delegation froze. "You've destroyed 17 star systems?" Ambassador Kiwan asked, his diplomatic training struggling to keep his voice level. "All uninhabited, I assure you," Dr. Bomey said quickly. "Well, uninhabited by anything we could communicate with. The Devourers had already consumed any original life in those systems and were using them as staging areas for attacks on populated worlds." "The Devourers you mentioned earlier?" Science Officer Soman asked. "Entities from the Galactic Core," Lieutenant Wubin explained. "They exist by consuming stellar matter and anything that gets in their way. We've been fighting them for 80 years now." Engineer Minseo was studying the weapon systems around them with new understanding. "These guns, you built them specifically to fight star system-sized threats?" "Had to," Captain Hyun replied. "When your enemy can absorb the energy output of an entire star, conventional weapons are useless. You need weapons that can output more energy than stars produce." "How is that even possible?" Admiral Taman asked. Dr. Bomey gestured toward the power core in the chamber's center. "By containing stellar-level energy sources and focusing their entire output through weapons designed to channel that power efficiently. It's actually quite elegant once you work out the engineering problems." Military advisor Ji-young was doing rapid calculations in her head. "The power requirements, even with a contained stellar mass, the energy needed to power weapons of this scale should be impossible to generate." "That was the problem we faced initially," Lieutenant Wubin agreed, "until we learned to tap into zero-point energy fluctuations and dimensional power bleeding. Once you can access energy from parallel universes, the power limitations become much more manageable." "You're drawing power from other dimensions?" Navigator Yunji asked faintly. "Only from uninhabited ones," Captain Hyun assured her. "We're very careful about that. The last thing anyone wants is to accidentally destabilize reality." "Communications." Officer Hansel was staring at the weapons surrounding them. "Captain Hyun, with weapons like these, you could conquer the entire galaxy in a matter of months." "Yes," Captain Hyun replied simply. "We could. But that would rather defeat the point, wouldn't it?" "What point?" Ambassador Kiwan asked. "Protecting civilizations," Dr. Bomey explained. "There's no point in destroying the very thing you're trying to preserve. We built these systems to fight threats that want to destroy or consume intelligent life, not to threaten other civilizations." "But surely you understand how terrifying this is for us," Captain Bora said. You have the power to annihilate any civilization in the galaxy, and you've been hiding that fact from everyone. Lieutenant Wubin looked genuinely confused. Why would we want to annihilate other civilizations? That would leave fewer allies to help fight the real threats. The casual way he said it was somehow more unsettling than any threat could have been. The humans genuinely didn't seem to understand why their capabilities might be frightening to other species. Captain Hyun, Admiral Taman said carefully, from our perspective, the fact that you possess such overwhelming military superiority makes you the threat. How do we know you won't decide that the galaxy would be better off under human control? Captain Hyun exchanged glances with Dr. Bomi and Lieutenant Wubin. For the first time since the tour began, he looked genuinely surprised. Admiral, we've had the capability to conquer the galaxy for over a century, he said. If we wanted to rule other civilizations, wouldn't we have done it by now? Maybe you're waiting for something, military advisor Ji Young suggested. Building up your forces for a coordinated assault. Dr. Bomi laughed, though not unkindly. Advisor Ji Young, this installation is one of our smaller defensive systems. If we wanted to conquer the galaxy, we wouldn't need to build up our forces. We'd just need to decide to do it. Smaller defensive systems? Science Officer Soman repeated weakly. Well, yes. Titan Base handles extra-dimensional threats and deep space anomalies. It's important work, but it's not our primary focus, Lieutenant Wubin explained. What is your primary focus? Ambassador Kiwan asked, though he was beginning to dread the answer. The big ones, Captain Hyun said simply. The big ones? Threats that operate on galactic or universal scales, Dr. Bomi explained. The Void Hunters. We mentioned earlier were actually considered a medium-level threat. The big ones are entities that can destroy entire galaxies or universes. Engineer Min Seo sat down heavily next to Navigator Yunji. You're fighting things that can destroy universes? Not actively, thankfully, Captain Hyun replied. Most of them are still sleeping or contained in their home dimensions, but our monitoring systems indicate that several of them are beginning to stir. That's why we decided it was time to make contact with the Galactic Council. You want our help fighting universe-destroying entities? Communications Officer Hansel asked incredulously. We want to help you prepare, Dr. Bomi corrected. When the big ones wake up, every intelligent species in the galaxy will need to work together if we want to survive. Captain Bora was beginning to understand the true scope of what they were dealing with. Captain Hyun, are you telling us that humanity has been fighting a secret war to protect the galaxy for over a century? Secret isn't the right word, Lieutenant Wubin said thoughtfully. We've never tried to hide what we do. We just assumed everyone knew about the threats and had their own ways of dealing with them. You thought every species in the galaxy was fighting universe-destroying entities? Admiral Taman asked. Well, no, but we thought they were at least aware of them, Captain Hyun replied. When we started detecting Council communications 50 years ago, we assumed you were coordinating galactic defense efforts. Our communications are mostly about trade agreements and territorial disputes, Ambassador Kiwan said weakly. The humans exchanged concerned glances. Oh, Dr. Bomi said quietly. Oh, that's not good. What's not good? Science Officer Soman asked. If the Council species aren't prepared for the big ones, and we're the only ones who have been fighting them, Captain Hyun trailed off, clearly troubled by the implications. Then when they wake up, you'll be completely defenseless, Lieutenant. Wubin finished, The council delegation sat in stunned silence as the full weight of their situation became clear. They weren't just meeting a powerful new species. They were discovering that their entire understanding of galactic threats was fundamentally wrong. "How long do we have?" Ambassador Kiwan asked quietly. "Before the big ones wake up?" Dr. Bomi consulted her data pad. "Our best estimates suggest anywhere from 50 to 200 years, assuming nothing accelerates the timeline." "What would accelerate the timeline?" Military Advisor Ji-young asked. Captain Hyun looked uncomfortable. "Large-scale galactic conflicts. The kind of wars that the Galactic Council might face if it had to deal with a major threat it wasn't prepared for." The implication was clear. If humanity hadn't made contact now, the Council's inevitable encounter with galactic-level threats could have triggered the very catastrophe that humanity had been working to prevent. They weren't just visiting a defensive installation. They were being offered humanity's protection whether they wanted it or not. The council delegation stood in silence for several minutes, each member trying to process the magnitude of what they had learned. Finally, Ambassador Kiwan found his voice. "Captain Hyun, I need to ask you something directly. Are we prisoners here?" Captain Hyun looked genuinely shocked. "Prisoners? Of course not. Why would you think that?" "Because you've just revealed that humanity possesses the power to destroy our entire civilization," Captain Bora said bluntly. "From our perspective, that makes us potential hostages." "Captain Bora," Dr. Bomi said gently, "if we wanted to control your civilizations, we wouldn't need to take hostages. We could simply announce our existence and make demands. The fact that we're having this conversation as equals should tell you something about our intentions." Lieutenant Wubin nodded enthusiastically. "Besides, taking prisoners would be counterproductive. We need allies, not subjects." "Need allies for what, exactly?" Admiral Taman asked. "For the war that's coming," Captain Hyun replied seriously. "The big ones aren't going to stay dormant forever. When they wake up, every intelligent species in the galaxy will need to fight, together or die separately." Science Officer Soman was studying the weapon systems around them with new understanding. "These installations, they're not just for defending humanity, are they? They're positioned to defend the entire galaxy." "Very perceptive," Dr. Bomi said approvingly. "Our 7 main installations form a defensive perimeter around the galactic core and the major spiral arms. If something tries to enter our galaxy from outside, or if something emerges from the core, we can respond quickly." "You've been protecting all of us," Navigator Yunji said quietly. "For over a century, you've been standing guard over the entire galaxy." "Someone had to," Lieutenant Wubin replied simply. "When we first encountered the Devourers, we tried to contact other civilizations for help. But none of them had the technology to fight entities of that scale." "So you developed it yourselves," Engineer Minseo said. "We didn't have much choice," Captain Hyun agreed. "The Devourers had already consumed 3 council worlds before we managed to stop them." The council delegation exchanged horrified glances. 3. "Council worlds were destroyed by these Devourers?" Ambassador Kiwan asked. "About 70 years ago," Dr. Bomi confirmed. "The Kepler, Vega, and Altair systems. We tried to intervene, but we were still developing our capabilities then. We weren't fast enough to save them." Communications Officer Hansel felt his heart sink. The Kepler disaster. The official report said it was a stellar collapse event. "It was," Lieutenant Wubin said sadly. "The Devourers caused the star to collapse prematurely. We couldn't stop it, but we managed to prevent them from using the energy to attack other systems." "The Vega colonies," Military Advisor Ji-young whispered. 2 billion people. "We know." Captain Hyun said quietly. "We remember every world we failed to protect. That's why we built installations like this one, so it would never happen again." The weight of what they were learning was almost unbearable. For decades, the Council had mourned the loss of those worlds to natural disasters, never knowing that they had been destroyed by entities that humanity was now fighting to keep at bay. "How many attacks have there been since then?" Admiral Taman asked. Dr. Bomi consulted her datapad. 47 major incursions, 118 minor ones, and 6 attempts at dimensional breach that would have compromised local space-time. "And you stopped all of them?" Captain Bora asked. "All the ones directed at inhabited systems," Captain Hyun confirmed. "We've lost some uninhabited systems that we couldn't reach in time, but no more populated worlds. This is why you wanted to make contact with the Council," Ambassador Kiwan realized. "You need us to know about these threats so we can prepare." "Partly," Lieutenant Wubin agreed, "but also because fighting alone is exhausting. We've been the galaxy's guardians for over a century, and it's been a heavy burden." Science Officer Samin was beginning to understand the human perspective. "You're offering to share the burden with us." "We're offering to help you become capable of sharing it," Dr. Bomi corrected. "Right now, no Council species has the technology to fight galactic-level threats, but with our help, you could develop those capabilities." "And in return?" "Military," Advisor Ji-young asked. "In return, we all have a better chance of surviving what's coming," Captain Hyun said simply. Engineer Min Seo was studying the structure of the installation around them. "Captain Hyun, this facility? How long would it take to build something like this?" "With current Council technology? Probably about 500 years, Dr. Bomi replied. "With our assistance and technological sharing, maybe 50 years. "You're offering to help us build our own installations like this?" Navigator Yunji asked. "If you want them," Lieutenant Wubin said. "Though we'd recommend starting with smaller defensive systems and working your way up. These installations require a lot of infrastructure to support them." Admiral Taman was beginning to see the full scope of what humanity was proposing. "You're not asking us to join your military force. You're asking us to become your military equals." "That's the idea," Captain Hyun confirmed. "When the big ones wake up, we'll need every advantage we can get. A galaxy-wide alliance of equally capable civilizations would be much more effective than a single species trying to protect everyone else." Captain Bora understood the strategic logic, but she also understood the implications. The technological advancement you're offering would fundamentally change every civilization in the galaxy. "Yes, it would," Dr. Bomi agreed. "But the alternative is remaining vulnerable to threats that could destroy all of us." "What if we refuse?" Ambassador Kiwan asked. "What if the Council decides it doesn't want to be part of this war?" Captain Hyun's expression became sad. "Then we'll continue to protect you as best we can, but your chances of survival when the big ones wake up will be much lower." "You wouldn't force us to accept your help?" Communications Officer Hansel asked. "Force you?" Lieutenant Wubin looked confused. "How would that help anyone? Unwilling allies are worse than no allies at all. The humans' casual acceptance of the Council's right to refuse their help was somehow more convincing than any threat could have been. It confirmed what the delegation was beginning to understand. Humanity wasn't offering protection in exchange for submission. They were offering partnership in exchange for shared responsibility. "Captain Hyun," Ambassador Kiwan said slowly, "what would this partnership look like practically? Technology sharing, joint training exercises, coordinated defense planning." Dr. Bomi replied. We'd help you build the infrastructure you need to defend yourselves, and you'd help us monitor and respond to threats across a wider area. And when the big ones wake up? Admiral Taman asked. Then we all fight together, Captain Hyun said simply, because that's the only way any of us survive. As the full scope of humanity's proposal became clear, the Council delegation realized they were facing the most important decision in galactic history. They could accept humanity's offer and fundamentally transform their civilizations, or they could refuse and remain vulnerable to threats they were only now learning existed. Either way, their understanding of the galaxy and their place in it would never be the same. The journey back to the Harmony's edge was quiet. Each member of the Council delegation was lost in their own thoughts, trying to process the magnitude of what they had learned, the comfortable assumptions that had guided galactic politics for centuries had been shattered in a single afternoon. As they settled into the ship's conference room, Ambassador Kiwan looked around at his team. Every face showed the same mixture of shock, fear, and reluctant understanding. Well, he said finally, I think we can safely say this first contact has not proceeded according to any of our protocols. That might be the understatement of the millennium, Captain Bora replied grimly. Science Officer Soman was still reviewing the data they had collected during the tour. The energy readings from that installation, even accounting for possible sensor errors, the power output exceeds our theoretical maximums by factors of thousands. And they said it was one of their smaller systems, Engineer Minseo added quietly. Navigator Yunji looked up from her own data pad. I've been analyzing the spatial distortions around Titan Base. The installation extends into at least 17 different dimensional pockets. The engineering required to create and maintain that kind of multi-dimensional structure is beyond anything we thought possible, Admiral Taman finished. But apparently, humans have been doing it routinely for decades. Military advisor Ji Young had been uncharacteristically quiet during the return journey. Now she spoke up with the voice of someone who had spent her life studying warfare and tactics. They weren't showing off, she said. That's what's been bothering me. Everything they showed us, every system they demonstrated, they presented it as routine maintenance of defensive necessities. What do you mean? Communications Officer Hansel asked. I mean, they weren't trying to impress us or intimidate us. They were simply explaining their daily operations. To them, building weapons that can destroy star systems and fighting entities that can consume galaxies is just their job. The implications of that observation settled over the group like a heavy blanket, which means, Captain Bora said slowly, that we still haven't seen their actual limits. Everything we witnessed was what they consider normal operational capability. Ambassador Kiwan felt a chill run down his spine. Captain Hyun mentioned installations designed to fight the big ones, universe-destroying entities. If what we saw was for fighting smaller threats... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Engineer Minseo was staring out the observation window at the artificial moon they were leaving behind. Do you think they're telling the truth? About protecting the galaxy for over a century? The Kepler disaster. Science, Officer Soman said quietly. The Vega colonies. The Altair incident. We assumed they were natural disasters, but the timeline matches what they told us. If they're lying, Admiral Taman said, then they've constructed the most elaborate deception in galactic history. And if they're telling the truth, then everything we thought we knew about the galaxy is wrong, Navigator Yunji finished. Ambassador. Kiwan activated the ship's communication system. Captain Hyun, This is Ambassador Kiwan. We need to discuss the next steps in this process. Captain Hyun's voice came through clearly. Of course, Ambassador. What would you like to know? The Council will need time to process what we've learned and consult with our member worlds. How long can you give us? As long as you need, Captain Hyun replied. Though I should mention that our monitoring systems are indicating increased activity from some of the entities we discussed. We estimate you have about 6 months before we'll need to take some kind of action. What kind of action? Military Advisor Ji-young asked. Depends on what the Council decides. If you choose to work with us, we'll begin immediate technology transfers and defensive preparations. If you choose not to, we'll need to upgrade our own defensive systems to compensate for protecting a larger population without assistance. The casual way he discussed protecting the entire galaxy was still unsettling, but the Council delegation was beginning to understand that this was simply how humans thought about their responsibilities. Captain Hyun, Ambassador Kiwan said carefully, what you're proposing would fundamentally change every civilization in the galaxy. Some species might see that as a threat to their cultural identity. That's understandable. Dr. Bomey's voice joined the conversation. We're not asking anyone to change their culture or values. We're just offering the tools needed to protect those cultures from extinction. But the technological advancement you're describing would inevitably change how societies function, Captain Bora pointed out. Yes, it would, Captain Hyun agreed. Just like space travel, faster-than-light communication, and energy weapons changed your societies when you developed them. The question is whether you want those changes to come from peaceful technological development or from desperate last-minute attempts to survive an existential threat, Lieutenant Wubin's voice added cheerfully. Besides, most species adapt quite well once they realize the alternatives. The Andromedans were hesitant at first, too, but now they're some of our most effective partners. The Council delegation exchanged glances. The Andromedans? Science Officer Soman asked. We've had no contact with them for over 50 years. We assumed they'd become isolationist. Oh, no, Lieutenant Wubin replied. They've been working with us on deep space monitoring. Very good at detecting dimensional anomalies. They just don't advertise their activities much. How many other species are already working with you? Admiral Taman asked. Actively? About 47, Dr. Bomey replied. Another 130 or so provide intelligence and early warning support. Most prefer to keep their involvement quiet. Ambassador, Kiwan felt the universe shift around him once again. Nearly 200 species were already part of humanity's defensive network, and the Council had been completely unaware of it. Captain Hyun, he said slowly, when you contacted the Council, we weren't your first choice for alliance, were we? Actually, you were our last hope, Captain Hyun replied honestly. Most other species either joined our network decades ago or lacked the technological base to be useful partners. The Council represents the largest group of advanced civilizations that hasn't yet been integrated into galactic defense planning. Which means, Navigator Unji asked, which means if the Council chooses not to participate, we'll have exhausted all diplomatic options for preparing the galaxy for what's coming, Dr. Bomey explained. The weight of that responsibility settled over the delegation. The decision they recommended to the Council wouldn't just affect their member worlds. It would determine whether the galaxy faced its ultimate challenge united or divided. Communications Officer Hansel activated his recording equipment. Ambassador Kiwan, I think we need to send a priority message to the Council immediately. Agreed, Ambassador Kiwan replied. He looked around at his team one final time. Are we all in agreement about what we've witnessed here? One by one, each member of the delegation nodded. Very well. Ambassador Kiwan turned back to the communication system. Captain Hyun, please transmit the coordinates for a council emergency assembly. We'll need every member world represented for this discussion. Of course, Ambassador. And thank you for listening with open minds. We know this is a lot to process. As the Harmony's Edge set course for the council assembly point, Ambassador Kiwan began composing the most important message in galactic history. How do you tell an entire civilization that everything they thought they knew about their place in the universe was wrong? How do you explain that they had been protected by guardians they never knew existed? How do you convince an alliance of proud, independent worlds that their survival depended on accepting help from a species they had dismissed as primitive just days before? Looking out at the stars, Ambassador Kiwan realized that the galaxy would never be the same again. The only question now was whether it would survive long enough to see what came next. Behind them, Titan Base resumed its eternal vigil, watching for threats that most of the galaxy still didn't know existed. And in installations throughout human space, other Guardians continued their patient watch over a universe full of species who were finally about to learn they were not alone in the dark.